Good evening, everybody. Tonight's top stories all center on one question. Just how many people in the swamp actually understand what they're talking about? National Economic Council Director Larry Kudlow today declared there's no trade war with China.
There's no trade war here. What you've got is the early stages of a process that will include tariffs, comments on the tariffs, then ultimate decisions and negotiations. There's already back channel talks going on. So look, I understand the stock market's anxiety. I get that. But on the other hand, don't overreact.
No trade war with China? No trade war with China. What do you call a trade deficit of $375 billion? 30 years of so-called free trade that has resulted in the transfer of trillions of dollars and China's theft of at least $300 billion in U.S. technology and military intellectual property each and every year. That's a trade war, folks. We're just not fighting it until this president arrived in Washington. Every president from Bill Clinton refused the trade war to fight it. In fact, 3 presidents in a row collaborated with the Chinese, enabled their theft of our most advanced military and commercial technologies, all in the name of free trade, transferring trillions of dollars of American wealth to China. President Trump is the first American leader to declare we will no longer enable, embolden, and enrich any trading partner that refuses to trade in a fair, reciprocal, and balanced relationship with the United States. And it is about time. And does anyone know what the special counsel means when he says President Trump is a subject of his investigation, but not a target? Does anyone in the swamp, besides President Trump, talk straight? And yes, a handful of congressmen. And yes, even though the president isn't a target of the special counsel, Mueller says he would like very much to interview the president. This is convincing. It is time for Mr. Mueller to gather up his partisan hacks and for all of them to go home. Congressman Ron DeSantis has been leading the effort to end the Mueller probe and to rein in the deep state. He joins us here in moments. And the Homeland Security Secretary today announcing President Trump will deploy National Guard troops to the border, but the DHS leader doesn't know the number of troops, know what they'll do or can do legally. We'll sort out the spin with Fox News legal analyst Greg Jarrett, political savant Ed Rollins. Our top story tonight, the deep state's never-ending obstruction of the Trump administration. House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes today wrote a letter to Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein and FBI Director Christopher Wray demanding they produce an unredacted copy of the July 2016 memorandum that started the so-called Russia collusion probe. Congressman Nunes now threatening subpoenas if the FBI continues to refuse to deliver the document. Fox News Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge live in Washington with the latest for us. Good evening, Catherine.
Well, thank you, Lou. Late today, Fox News obtained this letter that shows Congress is still having trouble getting records despite these promises of cooperation from the FBI Director and Deputy Attorney General. Republican Chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Devin Nunes, requested and was denied the July 2016 FBI memo that kick-started the Russia probe. Nunes wanted a clean copy of the memo without sections blacked out known as redactions. Fox News is told the memo was likely drafted by FBI agent Peter Strzok, or at least with his input. Strzok was removed from the Russia Special Counsel investigation after anti-Trump text messages were discovered. A leading national security defense attorney told Fox today that the Bureau could share the memo in a secure facility known as a SCIF if there are concerns about sensitive or classified information, because he added even the Bureau requires oversight.
It's not like they couldn't give them all of this information, but you know, I think when you see the Inspector General's report, you're going to see why they're hiding these kinds of things and the different things that happen there that they're not very proud of.
Republican chairman has set a deadline of a week today for a clean copy of the FBI memo, or the chairman may enforce existing subpoenas. Fox News asked the FBI and Justice Department for comment, and there was no immediate response. But of course, we will bring that to you, Lou, if we get some new information.
Thank you, Catherine. We
You're
look
welcome.
forward to that. Catherine Herridge. Joining us tonight, Congressman Ron DeSantis. He is a member of several key committees, including Oversight, Government Reform, Foreign Affairs, Judiciary. He has one of the largest committee portfolios in Washington, also the leading Republican candidate for the governorship of Florida. Congressman, good to have you with us. First, your reaction to the Mueller team statement that the president is no longer, if ever, a target of the investigation, the special counsel investigation, but now simply a subject?
Well, look, Lou, we've known that really from the start if you took the facts seriously. I mean, the president fires Jim Comey, and then on the basis of Rod Rosenstein writing a memo saying Comey should be fired, Comey leaks memos, including classified material, and then Rosenstein appoints a special counsel. For what purpose? There was never an underlying crime involving the president. And after all this investigation, there's been nothing, even with anybody on his campaign, in terms of the collusion angle. So I think we've come to the point now, Mueller wants to write a report. Knock yourself out, but I think this thing needs to be wrapped up.
You know, he wasn't hired and put in position to write a report. He was to investigate and determine whether or not there was anything to the original charge. It turns out the original charge was ether. There is no charge in his mandate. It's arguable, and I think convincingly so, that there should never have been a special counsel.
No, I agree with you. I think that there was, goes back to that Rosenstein appointing order. He said to look at possible links between Trump's campaign and anybody affiliated with Russia. Well, that's not in and of itself a criminal offense. What crime were you actually alleging? And they never really got to that point. And so everything that's been brought, the Manafort stuff, that had nothing to do with Donald Trump. That was way before the campaign. Michael Flynn and Papadopoulos, those were process crimes after the fact. They were really weak cases. I mean, Lou, did the Justice Department try to bring false statement charges against Huma Abedin or Cheryl Mills or Hillary Clinton? She spoke in front of the Benghazi committee and gave a lot of falsehoods about her email practices and handling classified information. So this thing, I think, has been problematic in that there was never a core crime. But then it seems like Mueller has just tried to get as many people under the net as possible. And so what you have is you have a much different level of zealousness in this case than you did with Hillary, where they bent over backwards not to make a case against her.
Do you think that the Hillary Clinton email case, will leave aside the foundation for right now, do you think there will ever be an adequate investigation of Hillary Clinton's email scandal?
One of the problems with it, at least for her, the initial mishandling of the classified, is you probably already passed the statute of limitations on that. What you're not past the statute of limitations is the destruction and the bleach bidding of the emails. I mean, think about it. Somehow Donald Trump obstructed justice by firing James Comey, which I think most of us look at today. I was supportive of it at the time, but that was a national service by firing James Comey. But how could you possibly say that could be obstruction of justice, but then bleach bidding emails that were under congressional subpoena are not? And yet that was never pursued. And then I think a lot of the false statements. So those two are still within the confines of the statute of limitations. I think if you actually had a special counsel, they would be able to finally bring some light to that.
And you've been calling for a second special counsel along with Congressman Jim Jordan, Mark Meadows, Matt Gaetz, and others. What's the likelihood now? It seems to dissipate, the odds seem to dissipate with each passing day.
Well, I'm in the process of working with some of my colleagues to catalog the different offenses that have been committed or may have been committed from kind of the tail end of the Clinton investigation through this FISA, through the dossier, all the way into Mueller with different people, the usual suspects, James Comey, Andrew McCabe, some of the folks in the Justice Department, and cataloging that and then providing.
We can call them, Congressman, the Dirty Dozen, because that's what they amount to.
And many of them have been fired. Some of them have been demoted. I think what's going to happen, Lou, is we're going to work on that. I want to present that to Sessions and to Huber so he knows what he should be looking for. But then when this IG report drops, I mean, it should have been done by now, involving how Comey handled and Loretta Lynch handled the Hillary case. That could be an impetus to do more at that point as well.
Not to prejudge it, because heaven knows we wouldn't want to do that with the Justice Department. But the IG's long-awaited and long-deferred report, it looks like it has the potential for becoming a scandal all of its own. Your thoughts on the prospects now?
Well, we know McCabe got fired because of that investigation. We know the Strzok and Page text messages were found during that investigation. So my hope is that the misconduct is cataloged, and that people like Strzok can be fired, removed from the government, and then obviously face whatever prosecutions may be warranted based on the evidence.
Should Rosenstein be fired for writing a memorandum a week after supporting the investigation of Manafort going back to 2006, a week after the special counsel raided his home a week later?
Look, it's a really screwy thing. I'm still trying to wrap my head around how it could have happened. Look, at a minimum, I think Rosenstein should be recused from this, Lou. He wrote the memo saying Comey should be fired. So now he's overseeing Mueller supposedly investigating whether that constituted obstruction of justice. Give me a break. So I think he should be recused from this, and I don't think Sessions should have recused. So they got it backwards. Sessions recused, and now Rosenstein is supposedly directing traffic. I don't think that's the right thing to do.
Backwards seems to be often the rule in Washington, D.C. Congressman, great to see you. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Lou.
Up next, the caravan splits up in Mexico. The illegal immigrants still determined to make their way across our border with Mexico. Greg Jarrett joins me here next. We'll talk about what the president can do to stop them. The caravan of some 1,000 Central Americans moving through Mexico toward the United States border appears to be dispersing, at least splintering into smaller groups. That's right, the caravan now becoming a succession of minivans headed north. And the Associated Press seems to be rooting for the illegal immigrants' success. Today they reported on how the caravan organizers, quote, told worried families Tuesday the U.S. president had floated the idea of using a nuclear weapon against the caravan of mostly women and children who have fled violence in Central America. That is not only on its face stupid beyond any comprehension, and how that passes for journalism at the AP is beyond me, but certainly to suggest that a nuclear weapon, if there were not women and children, would be somehow appropriate raises the entire absurdity by orders of magnitude. Joining us tonight, Fox News legal analyst Greg Jarrett. Great to have you here.
Good to see you, Lou.
The media seems to have chosen sides, and they're all about the caravan, the illegal immigrants, and the hell with the United States and its damn border.
Well, you know, Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama were it 2 years ago to be standing down there at the border, handing out waters and potato chips. Welcome to America. Come on in.
Yeah, I'm surprised that it isn't Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan instead.
Yeah, well, this president has the courage to say, wait a minute, we don't know who these people are. They could be drug cartel, they could be gun runners, they could be terrorists, they could be veteran criminals, violent ones. So he's doing the right things, and he threatened Mexico with ripping up NAFTA, and they've capitulated.
Well, it appears they have. We'll see where these so-called minivans head, having broken up the caravan and how long that lasts. The troops going to the border. This is permitted under the Insurrection Act, not to get too deep in the woods here, to dispatch the National Guard.
Right.
What can they actually do?
Well, they can stop people from coming in who don't belong here, who don't have a legal right to be here.
They can actually apprehend them.
Oh, sure. They can put up a human barrier and block them. But I'm encouraged that Mexico says, wait a minute, we're going to stop these people ourselves, and we're going to ask them to apply for asylum here rather than in America, so that may help.
Let's put up, if we may, the full screen on the Insurrection Act, the relevant clause, which is whenever the president considers unlawful obligations, combinations, obstructions, assemblages, or rebellion against the authority of the United States, the president may call the state's National Guard into federal service and employ whatever, and this is interesting, and employ whatever federal armed forces he considers necessary. That seems to be a broad and wide shorthand.
It really is. It gives him unfettered discretion because, remember, his constitutional duty, first and foremost, is to protect the lives and safety of Americans, including their livelihoods as well. He takes it quite seriously. California, which is this sanctuary oasis, of course, takes a different point of view, but they must, under the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution, take a back seat to what President Trump is doing.
It's always interesting when attorneys say must. because there is always a court case around must.
Right.
And 27 lawsuits against the Trump administration by the state of California, fighting in nearly every instance. Immigration, the right of the president to determine immigration policy and existing immigration law.
And they may win a few district court cases, but district court judges get it wrong all the time, which is why we have courts of appeal and a Supreme Court. In the end, the law is abundantly clear, and the president will win.
All right. With that, I am assured, and I know lots of our listeners and viewers are as well. Jonathan Turley wrote, when will the media accept that Trump is not a criminal target? Referring to Robert Mueller's determination that the president is a subject, not a target.
Right.
And the left-wing media in this country, which is just damn near all the media, has just gone nuts over the last 24 hours.
They've been crying buckets because they promised for the better part of a year that President Trump would be criminally indicted and thrown from office, tarred and feathered, rode out on a rail. And suddenly they learn, by virtue of the Washington Post, that that may not be true. So they're upset about it, and they're giving this actually very little play. I've been watching all day long because they grudgingly don't want to admit there was never any evidence of collusion, and that firing Comey and making remarks about Flynn don't constitute obstruction of justice.
Will the lights at CNN, CBS, NBC, all of the networks, will the left-wing networks, will they all go dark at the same time? I mean, what will they do with themselves if they haven't a special counsel to cheer on?
Well, going dark would be the ideal, and it would certainly benefit Americans. They'd finally actually get to listen to the truth instead of fake news on those networks. It's going to be very difficult for them to try to rationalize this. My guess is they will simply conjure out of thin air additional criminality of all manner to accuse the president.
Devin Nunes threatening to enforce a subpoena against the FBI for refusing to deliver a unredacted memorandum that started all of this. Chairman Nunes has given the FBI, Christopher Wray, the Justice Department, till the 11th of this month to deliver or be subpoenaed.
And then I suspect he'll move for contempt of Congress and move for legal proceedings against them.
And this would create the foundation for getting rid of Rosenstein and for getting rid of Sessions, impeachment.
Arguably, it would. That would take a long time, but
let's do the easy pass express. Expedited.
Let's do that. Yeah, this is classic FBI cover-up. They know that this electronic communication, likely written by Peter Strzok, that launched the Trump Russian investigation, is incriminating, and they're trying to hide it. They're doing their very best to hide it. In the end, they will not succeed. The truth will emerge.
You just said classic FBI cover-up. Do you remember the old days when we would be talking about a classic Al Capone cover-up or a classic mafia cover-up? But now we're talking about a classic FBI cover-up, and we have piles and piles of evidence to support the statement.
It's sad that law enforcement has now become, as a group, lawbreakers. And I'm not talking about the rank and file, because they're great people and they work hard and they're honorable. I'm talking about people like McCabe and Comey and Strzok and Page and the whole gang of them.
We're talking about the FBI here. We're not talking
leadership
about law enforcement broadly.
Right.
We're talking about the FBI.
We're talking about, and this is what happens when you give people unfettered power. They think,
but nobody gave it to them.
Yes, well, they gave it to themselves.
We still have a Constitution.
They gave it to themselves. And speaking of the Constitution, Congress has constitutional power of oversight. And you cannot, even if you're the FBI, thumb your noses at Congress.
Well, can someone come in and grab Christopher Wray by the nose and tell him that there is a Constitution and that he gets to follow it?
Well, he'll go kicking and screaming trying to continue the cover-up. They've been doing it now for 7 months since the original subpoena was issued, and they'll continue to do it until they go down fighting.
Does Nunes have the power to get this done?
Oh, he absolutely has the power. As I say, it derives from the Constitution.
should the president even consider firing Ray for refusing to accede to the constitutional responsibility of oversight for the Congress?
Under the law, if someone who is an FBI director, any top official, is engaged in dereliction of duty, the president has the duty and the right and the power to fire them.
Well, Sessions also has that ability because that FBI director works for him and he hasn't got the guts to do it again.
Yeah, well, your expectations are very high for a guy who sets all low expectations.
It was a question, not an emphatic statement. Greg Jarrett, as always.
Good to see you, Lou.
Good to see you. Be sure to vote in our poll. Do you believe that Robert Mueller's special counsel investigation should be shut down now that he's determined President Trump is not a target? Cast your vote on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. We'd like to hear from you. Follow me on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. Like me on Facebook and Instagram. Lou Dobbs Tonight. On Wall Street, stocks staging a massive, epic comeback. A wild trading session. The Dow finished up 231 points after being down more than 500 points early in the day. That's right, more than a 700-point swing. The S&P up 30, the Nasdaq up 101 points. Volume on the big board, 3.3 billion shares. This is only the third time in history that the Dow has recovered from a 500-point sell-off to finish the session higher. And a reminder, listen to my reports 3 times a day, coast to coast on the Salem Radio Network. Up next, Hillary Clinton's blame game tour gets more absurd, keeps rolling. This time she takes aim at, well, she's found a place in her heart for the NRA. We're coming right back with Ed Rollins. Rhino Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell siding with the Dems against the president's tough, strong stance on trade. The Senate Majority Leader actually told a group of business leaders in Kentucky that he's nervous about tariffs, that they could be a slippery slope toward a trade war, said the man who has facilitated for the Chinese for 30 years. And, of course, the Business Roundtable and the Chamber of Commerce. McConnell isn't a man prone to be nervous, except, of course, when confronted by policies that go against the dictate of the Business Roundtable and Chamber, his lords and masters in the swamp. Joining us tonight, one of the best political minds in the country, Ed Rollins, former White House political director under President Reagan, now Fox Business political analyst. Great to have you here.
Thank you.
What in the world is Mitch McConnell thinking?
I have no idea. You know, every time he goes home, he says something to the local body that has international. The president has drawn a line in the sand, and it's a very important line in the sand, in which we're going to basically, if the other countries don't want to deal with us fairly, then he's going to basically go right to them. And at the end of the day, the American public's behind him. And I think the reality is we're not going to have a trade war. And if we have a trade war, it's because they won't basically negotiate with him.
I heard today Larry Kudlow, the president's new director of the National Economic Council, Peter Navarro, the head of the Trade Council. I mean, for crying out loud, they're sitting there talking like they're defending the president when he is a man who does not require defense, instead of advocating the policies that will eliminate these trade imbalances that have devastated this country's economic growth.
As you say, he's made the decisions. They're all tough decisions. The president has to make 3 or 4 tough decisions every day, and now you go out and sell it. Your job is to go out and sell it. And I think to a certain extent, they got to learn. They got to learn that's their role now, because he can't do it all by himself. And if what McConnell doesn't realize, Republicans have nothing to run on except the Trump agenda. And if every one of his members don't go out and basically work hard to make this happen and advocate what the president has done and what they have done in turn with him, they're going to lose. They're going to lose this.
Scott Walker, Governor Walker, Wisconsin, for crying out loud, they lose a Supreme Court.
A nonpartisan. This is
quote unquote nonpartisan. The truth of the matter is, Walker starts talking about we got to get ready for a blue wave. We got to be careful. We got to do this. Where in the heck does the Republican Party manufacture this kind of nonsense?
Well, the irony is, Walker was one of the stars early on. He won 3 races in 4 years. And the most interesting thing is the most vulnerable incumbent we had last time was Senator Johnson, who went out and had a big victory in the Trump years.
Because of Donald Trump.
Absolutely. So I argue with candidates. Go out and support the president. Go out and basically argue what he's talking about, because that's all the country's going to pay attention.
How stupid are these people? I'm asking this. I'm not going to name names, but how stupid are they, these Republican candidates, that they have to be told that Donald Trump is the reason they're sitting in control of the House and the Senate?
Well, unfortunately, they need to learn that lesson over and over again. And
Do they think it's Paul Ryan or Mitch McConnell?
well, it's certainly.
Good Lord.
Well, that's part of the problem with Washington, D.C. is they get there and they basically become a part of the entity. And the reality is, as I said to you earlier, I ran Ronald Reagan all over this country. Ronald Reagan never elected a single senator or House member by himself. If the member would say, send me to Washington, I'm going to support Ronald Reagan's programs, they won. If they didn't, if the president just went in and did a fundraiser for him, they didn't win. So I argued every candidate that's talked to me about this race, go out and say, I'm for Trump, I'm supporting Trump's policies, and that's how they're going to be aggressive and win.
Let's talk about McConnell and Ryan because they're getting to be a really big problem. By the way, it's not a problem for this president, in point of fact. It's frustrating. They can annoy him, irritate him, and block some of his program. But the truth is they can cost a lot of congressmen and will cost a lot of congressmen and senators their seats because they haven't, those congressmen and senators don't have the guts to buck Ryan and McConnell. Ryan and McConnell could give a damn about whether they're in charge or not.
Well, we have 37 open seats right now where incumbents aren't running for re-election. And those challengers that are going to win those seats are only going to win it if they talk about the Trump agenda. The Trump agenda is the only agenda Republicans have that anybody's paying attention to.
Are there any options for the president? Can he get rid of Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan? Can the conference muster the guts to actually say, you know, we've had enough of your nonsense? They're not Republican. They're not conservative. They've got a little R next to their name, I guess.
I think he can encourage members inside that are unhappy. There's a lot of members unhappy. The Freedom Caucus is unhappy. There's a lot of people unhappy. And Ryan himself, I think, is going to give the seat up at the end of this term, or maybe even before. McConnell's a tougher
Well,
thing.
if he sits in that seat until the election, the Republicans are going to get wiped out in the House.
I agree. And his agenda is not the Trump agenda. He wants to talk about entitlement reform, which is a guarantee that we'll lose the House of Representatives.
Yeah, can you imagine that? Now, imagine Ryan campaigning on this. I just helped work through a 40% cut in taxes for corporate America, and I want to take away your Social Security, your Medicare, and Medicaid.
Right.
What kind of genius is that?
Among the voters that are very key to us.
Unbelievable. How can such... I won't finish the question. I'll just say thank you, Ed. Great
My
to
pleasure.
see you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We continue in one moment. Joining me now, former Vice Chief of Staff for the Army, as well as retired four-star General Jack Keane, now Fox Business Senior Strategic Analyst. Great to have you here.
Great to be here, Lou.
The President has ordered the generals to deliver a plan for withdrawal of U.S. troops from Syria once ISIS is defeated. Your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, first of all, what's left to be done? We took away their caliphate in Raqqa. Fierce fighting well over a year to do that.
Right.
Our guys were pretty much advisors and probably a little bit of the leading too of the Syrian forces that did that so successfully. So great victory for our folks there. We've got about 3,000 fighters between Iraq and Syria, and the leadership of ISIS is down in the southeastern part of the Euphrates River Valley as it creeps its way into Iraq. We got to clean all of that out. And then I don't think we should immediately pull out after that. We have to stabilize the region just a little bit. And what we find is that when a conflict is over, if we just pull up and leave and we're not concerned about winning the peace, not just the war, there's a tendency that the enemy is going to be able to get back in there. That's what happened in Iraq. That's what happened in Libya. And we shouldn't be making that mistake.
What does that peace, that stable peace, look like in Syria? It is hard for me to even contemplate a significant, sustained impact of U.S. policy in Syria.
Yeah, that's a great question. Here's what I think so our audience can understand. We've got about 2,000 advisors in Syria working with partners. And we have a few thousand in Iraq and a few thousand more than that in Afghanistan. They're what I describe the forward defense against ISIS and radical Islam. Right. Their forward presence. And the amount of forces involved in all of that combined in all three countries are less than what we have in Korea, which is 28,000. Mm-hmm. So, and they're not directly engaged in combat. They're working with our partners. So it is a very small investment to make to protect the homeland and protect the American people. And that's the danger by pulling out, that we incentivize ISIS to come back.
I guess the question becomes, how soon is a good time to withdraw?
Yeah, I say not for the foreseeable future. And that would be the best answer that I can give, because this president came in and said, look, I'm not giving timetables. I'm making decisions based on conditions. And I would like him to continue to do that. His commanders will tell him what the situation looks like. They would tell him now not to go.
Is his metric correct? That is, when ISIS is destroyed, that's when he will talk about pulling our troops.
I think then you can put in a time frame that sort of makes some sense. I don't think you do it immediately. Listen, I do agree with him on the money situation. I mean, freezing the $200 million for reconstruction, the Saudis are supposed to ante up $4 billion, Lou, and they haven't anteed up a dime. And the fact that he's holding back this money, talk to our allies and get them to put some skin in the game here.
Well, the Crown Prince can go back to the Ritz and perhaps shake loose a little money. Let me ask very quickly your thoughts about the military now being dispatched to the border, the National Guard.
Yeah. Well, what's happened? When the president took over, very precipitously, the illegals coming across the border, gang members, drug trafficking, illegal immigrants, dropped dramatically. But now they have gone back to pre-election numbers. Yeah. So
the first instance we call the Trump effect. The second instance I call the McConnell, Ryan, Pelosi, Schumer effect.
Okay, well, I'm not willing to go as far as that, right? But
that's why I decided I'd take the lead.
But you got it in. Okay, that's good. So this is realistic. He doesn't have the wall. He wants to make some progress. We've got about 2,000 miles of border. We've got about 700 miles of fencing that's up there now. Some of that's inadequate. We want to do another 800 miles. He's got none of that other 800 miles and no improvement.
Well, he's not only doesn't have a dime for the wall that he was elected to build.
A little over $1 billion. Yeah.
Well, not for the wall,
but it's for everything around
components. It. And secondly, instead of adding agents to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, there was actually a reduction of almost 300 agents. Yeah. That's an insult from Ryan. That's an insult from the Congress and the Senate.
Yeah. Well, the president, he takes this job very seriously.
Thank God. It's about time somebody
did. And this is a way to do it. And I would think also this would incentivize, hopefully, the Congress of the United States to get on with providing the money for the best thing we could do, which is some kind of an effective barrier.
General Jack Keane, as always.
Good talking to you, Lou.
Be sure to vote in our poll tonight. Do you believe Robert Mueller's special counsel investigation should now be shut down, that he's determined President Trump is not a target? Cast your vote on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. Please roll the nightly video. These snowboarders have guts. They fly off this rocky ledge in Alaska, clear a nearly 60-foot gap, then soar over cars right below them. Guts? You call that guts? Yeah, I call that guts. Up next, more reason to ditch Mitch and dump Ryan. A few thoughts now on the gutless rhino leaders intent on working against President Trump and his policies. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell taking aim at the president's tariffs, calling them a, quote, slippery slope. Speaker Ryan recently warned of unintended consequences. Sounds very ominous, right? McConnell and Ryan always choose the safe path for them, and they only do the bidding of their masters at the Chamber of Commerce and Business Roundtable in all instances. They ignore the president's call to fix the colossal damage to our economy and our national interests, the result of free trade at any cost for America. The rhinos already demonstrating they don't care much about national interest, especially when it comes to the border. Ryan and McConnell's refusal to secure the border, to build the wall, to follow President Trump's lead, leaving the president with few options, forcing him to send the National Guard to the border if we are to secure the border at all. And frankly, if that succeeds, well, it is very comforting to know we have a man of action in the White House, and that obviously drives Ryan and McConnell simply nuts, that we have a man of action in the presidency. So I guess McConnell and Ryan will just have to get over themselves. Our quote of the evening, this one from Dwight Eisenhower, who said, quote, "History does not long entrust the care of freedom to the weak or the timid." Joining us tonight, former Pinal County, Arizona Sheriff Paul Babu. He was a major in the Arizona Army National Guard. He was commanding 1,200 National Guardsmen at the border in Yuma back in 2006 when President Bush dispatched them there. Paul, it's great to see you, and welcome back to the broadcast. What are your thoughts as you hear the president has decided to send the National Guard back to the border, and how effective do you think they will be?
Bold leadership, one, nothing less from our President Trump. And second, it's absolutely necessary because he's being handcuffed by Congress, continually thwarted. And this is an action the president can take and has several avenues in which to execute this, to deploy armed National Guard soldiers to the southwest border. It's been done before with great success in certain areas, and we can learn from those lessons that we've achieved. And the president should absolutely implement this plan.
Talking about the Insurrection Act, which gives the president the authority to move the National Guard to the border or use federal forces in any other way, which he determines the national security is at risk. You were deployed right on the border, or were you back from the border? I recall vividly the number of guardsmen. There were 6,000 at the peak. Almost an impossible job, except on specific sectors where they were deployed to help the Border Patrol. Your thoughts about what can be done this time?
Exactly. A couple, not just the Insurrection Act, the president can also deploy through National Guard Bureau, working with the governors of the 4 states. Obviously, we'd have a problem with California, but to deploy 6,000 armed soldiers and not to dilute their strength from having an armed presence directly on the border. As the soldiers and airmen that I commanded, we actually deployed in IET, entry identification teams, directly on the border in high visibility. We actually lit them up at night. So anybody south of the border, smugglers of drugs or humans, would see, oh my God, there's armed soldiers right at the border. That's a deterrent. And it worked. In the Yuma sector, we saw a 94% decrease in illegal entries there.
And the Yuma sector, I should point out, was one of the most heavily trafficked sectors across the entire border.
It was, and we worked in support. We did not have law enforcement authority. We actually worked directly with our heroes in the Border Patrol, and we worked terrifically with them. Ron Colburn was a chief at the time, and nobody came across the border. And they didn't do that in every sector along the 9 sectors of the southwest border. So President Trump has to be very clear in directing and ensuring the military has learned those lessons and wants to achieve Yuma-like success, 94% reduction, full security at the border.
Impressive, and I think we also have to give some context. President Bush and President Obama, when both men deployed the National Guard, were along certain sectors playing games, and they did so advisedly to make certain that they were getting their results that they wanted, which was to permit at least some of those people to get across the border. Part of it was pure politics, and part of it was pure nonsense. Both presidents gaming the American people with that, and obviously we don't have to worry about that with President Trump. He means business. How many troops do you think it would take, National Guard troops, to have the 94% effect across that border?
You would need that 6,000 again, and how you could. We actually had soldiers that were actually turning wrenches, fixing Border Patrol vehicles. We had some in their communications center actually doing surveillance and other doing paperwork. There should be none of that. If we're going to send soldiers to the border, send armed soldiers to the border, directly on the border, as you referenced earlier, not 20 miles in from the border, on the border, to have the physical, visual show of force that's very intimidating. And they have radios of the Border Patrol, so if there's any entry, we immediately called the Border Patrol. They rapidly responded, and that's the impact. It was immediate. And so we do that across the border in high trafficked areas. We know where they're at. The president's going to see terrific success.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, and I think one of the ways that'll be to judge the success is how soon it is that Mexico starts talking about the militarization by the United States of its border. Now, what is really ironic and hypocritical and disgusting to me about the Mexican government's response is that they will ignore the fact that $64 billion worth of drugs, methamphetamines, marijuana, heroin, and cocaine are crossing from Mexico into the United States and killing literally millions of Americans over the last several decades. They will be ignoring the fact that the drug cartels have created a narco state in northern Mexico.
Yes.
And encroaching in some cases into the United States, but they will object so sweetly to our militarization of the border. What is the best rejoinder that you can imagine?
Well, the fact it's next to a failed state in Mexico, and we have a sovereign right as a nation to protect and secure our border. And if we're not able to do that, then we cease to be a republic. And the National Guard heroes that have served, many of them in Afghanistan and Iraq, there's no better mission. And in fact, I would say I've been in Iraq and I served in Yuma. This is a job for our National Guard to serve here at home and put America and our security, our safety first, and to secure our own border and protect our own country for once.
Paul Bavier, great to see you, and we thank you for joining us tonight.
Good to see you, Lou.
Thanks so much, Paul.